Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're exploring one of history's absolute most epic, surprising, and honestly improbable lives. We are talking about Zahir-ud-Din Mohammad Babur. Now, you probably know him as the legendary founder of the mighty Mughal Empire. But as we unpack the sources today, you're going to see that his path to greatness was anything but a straight line. So here is the central puzzle we're trying to solve today. How did a homeless, exiled teenager manage to found a 200-year empire? Babur's life is this incredible, real-world David versus Goliath story. I mean, it's a tale of massive, devastating setbacks, followed by ultimate, literal, world-shaping comebacks. To trace this insane journey from the mountains of Central Asia all the way down into the plains of India, here's our roadmap. We'll start with the boy king's exile, then cover his rebirth in Kabul, break down the tactical genius of the First Battle of Panipat, look a bit closer at the poet-emperor himself, and finally examine his legacy and final rest. Right, so let's start at the very beginning. Section 1, the boy king's exile. Babur was born in the Fergana Valley, over in what is now Uzbekistan, and he had some seriously heavy royal pedigree. Through his dad, he's a direct descendant of the great conqueror Timur. And through his mom, he traces his lineage right back to Genghis Khan. 12. That is the incredibly young age at which Babur ascended the throne of Fergana in 1494. And the circumstances were, well, truly bizarre. His father died suddenly in a freak accident when a poorly constructed pigeon cote just toppled right into a ravine. So just like that, a 12-year-old boy is thrust into power, immediately facing these hostile uncles and rebellious nobles who all wanted a piece of his territory. Let's move to the timeline and see how this builds, because his youth was a roller coaster. He inherits the throne in 1494. Then, in 1497, at just 15 years old, he actually achieves his dream of conquering the magnificent city of Samarkand. But he only holds it for 100 days. He gets sick, a rebellion costs him his home of Fergana, and in all that chaos, he loses Samarkand too. By 1501, he loses yet again to his fierce rivals, the Uzbeks. And by 1502, he has lost absolutely all of his ancestral lands. Which brings us to this incredibly heartbreaking quote from his own memoirs, the Baburnama. He writes, "During my stay in Tashkent, I endured much poverty and humiliation, no country or hope of one." It really humanizes his absolute lowest point. The future emperor of India was literally wandering the mountains with a tiny band of followers, entirely reliant on the charity of friends and peasants. He had nothing. But, history is made by those who refuse to give up. Moving on to Section 2, rebirth in Kabul. Realizing he just couldn't reclaim his homeland in the north, Babur makes this massive strategic pivot. He sets his sights south to rebuild his fortunes. In October 1504, a 21-year-old Babur leads his men across the freezing, snowy passes of the Hindu Kush Mountains, and it pays off. He manages to secure the city of Kabul without a massive fight, mostly because the locals hated the current usurper. Suddenly, Babur has a brand new mountain kingdom. Kabul became his sanctuary, his new base of operations, and ultimately, the launchpad he's going to use to turn toward India. Now, while he was in Kabul, and during a visit to the cultural capital of Herat, Babur became deeply steeped in what historians call the Timurid Renaissance. Think of this as a brilliant period of art, literature, and intellectual growth. See, Babur wasn't just a warlord. He completely absorbed this sophisticated Persianate and Turkic culture, everything from poetry to landscaping. And this is vital to remember because this is the exact culture he would eventually export to the Indian subcontinent. Okay, fast forward a couple of decades. We are stepping into the tactical war room for Section 3, the First Battle of Panipat. The year is 1526, and Babur is now facing the massive forces of the fading Delhi Sultanate, ruled by Ibrahim Lodi. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is this staggering numerical disadvantage Babur faced. Just look at these numbers. Babur brings maybe 12,000 men. Ibrahim Lodi meets him with anywhere from 50,000 to 70,000 men, plus a terrifying force of 1,000 war elephants. On paper, this is a massacre waiting to happen, but Babur brought something Lodi didn't have: modern gunpowder technology. Let's break down his brilliant tactical innovations here, which he actually adapted from the Ottomans. Step 1. He defended his center by tying 700 wagons together with ropes, leaving just these small gaps for his cavalry to sally out. Step 2. When Lodi attacked this narrow front, Babur unleashed his cannons and matchlock muskets. The deafening noise absolutely panicked the Indian war elephants, who just turned right around and trampled Lodi's own infantry. Then, step 3, he deployed Tulugma, these rapid cavalry flanking maneuvers, to completely encircle Lodi's confused army, trapping them in a deadly crossfire. The result was totally decisive. Babur reflected on the victory in his memoirs, writing, "By the grace of the Almighty God, this difficult task was made easy to me, and that mighty army, in the space of a half a day, was laid in dust." In a mere half day, Ibrahim Lodi was killed, the Lodi dynasty was effectively over, and the foundation for the Mughal Empire in India was set in stone. So let's pivot a bit to Section 4, the Poet-Emperor. Because behind the cannons and the cavalry charges was a surprisingly sensitive, highly educated, and deeply artistic individual. We know this primarily because of the Baburnama. These are his highly detailed personal memoirs. And it's incredibly rare in world history for a conqueror to basically leave behind an honest, deeply self-reflective diary. He wrote it in Chagatai Turkic, and today it is considered a legitimate literary masterpiece, packed with observations on flora, fauna, culture, and all his own internal struggles. And I mean, he was really honest. Consider this anecdote. Babur writes about this teenage infatuation he had with a boy in his camp named Baburi. He says, "Occasionally Baburi came to me, but I was so bashful that I could not look him in the face, much less converse freely." It totally strips away that myth of the unshakable warlord, doesn't it? The mighty future emperor was once just an awkward, bashful teenager dealing with a crush. It just makes him incredibly human. He also had this razor-sharp wit. Babur loved throwing lavish wine parties in his beautiful terraced gardens. But before a major battle against Rajput forces, he publicly swore off alcohol for religious and health reasons. Yet, he couldn't resist dropping this iconic line in his memoirs. He writes, "Everyone regrets drinking and swears an oath. I swear the oath and regret that." So he gave up the wine, but clearly he didn't lose his sense of humor. Which brings us to our final section, legacy and final rest. Babur actually only spent the last 4 years of his life continuously fighting to consolidate his power across Hindustan and establish this massive new order. When we look at what he left behind, we absolutely have to look at his family tree. His notable descendants included his eldest son and successor, Humayun, along with Kamran and Hindal Mirza. And, crucially, his daughter Gulbuddin Begum. She became a highly acclaimed author and historian in her own right, actually penning the Humayunama. It was this family, carrying his Timurid cultural values, that forged the empire over the coming generations. Babur died in the year 1530 at the really young age of 47 in Agra, India, and he was initially buried right there. But here's the crucial point. While he had conquered this vast new territory in the Indian subcontinent, in his private writings, he complained constantly about the harsh climate. He desperately missed the cool streams and the sweet melons of Central Asia. His heart was never truly in the intense heat of Hindustan. Because of this, fulfilling his final wishes, his remains were eventually moved. He was reburied in Bagh-e-Babur, these absolutely stunning terraced gardens that he personally designed back in Kabul. This final resting place perfectly honors his profound, lifelong love for nature, gardening, and his enduring connection to Kabul, the very city that gave him sanctuary when he had literally nothing. And I think this brilliantly illustrates the philosophy of the man. Let's wrap up with this poignant, slightly provocative thought from the emperor himself. The new year, the spring, the wine, and the beloved are joyful. Babur, make merry, for the world will not be there for you a second time. It is a powerful reminder from a guy who lost kingdoms and built empires from scratch. You only get one time in this world. So the question is, what legacy are you building with yours? Thank you so much for exploring with us, and keep seeking the structure behind the stories.